Yeah, the Mishnah.
Lighter more.
Yeah, much lighter. Much a lot of halach and a ma'aser.
Yeah.
Yeah, Pesachim, yes. It's all too right. Oh, we're gonna need to wait now. Oh, sure. Maybe you need water.
He's a family with responsibility really, to provide us with sustenance.
Okay, let's start. Good evening, everybody. Good work. We said many times Pesachim goes mainly chronologically. It's interesting because we've had a lot about Issa Chometz, which is like the 5th or 6th hour of El Pesach, and now I've got the mitzvah of making matzah. In those days, many people would bake matzahs on El Pesach literally. Some people even do nowadays. But then we go back to Kutach HaBavli, which is the things which is forbidden on Pesach. Okay, it's not exactly chronologically, but mainly chronologically. So now we're going to learn about the mitzvah of matzah on Pesach. This is always a sweet quiz question you can ask people. Do you have to eat matzah on Pesach?
No. First night.
Oh, only the first night. So our Mishnah is talking about the first night of Pesach. And it's quite important to distinguish this. We're going to have it a few times. That means there'll be certain things which are kosher matzah for the rest of Pesach, but not for the first night. Oh, shmur, and we'll see other things, for example. For example, matzah, shiur, and things like that. Right? There's many different kinds of matzahs which are kosher for the rest of Pesach, but now Mishnah is only talking about the first night of Pesach. And the first night of Pesach, there's a chiyuv to eat matzah. So the Mishnah says, Eilu dvorim, Mishnah Lamed Hei Amud Aleph, 6, 7, 9 from the top. Eilu dvorim shad moitzu b'nei dech v'asur Pesach. These are the items you could be yotze on Pesach. Chitim, b'chitim, wheat, b'ser, and barley, b'kustin, spelt, b'shif, and yizrai, b'shvil, shul, and oats. And for most of you, you've rattled off the list. You don't think about it again, because we all use wheat matzahs. I just tell you, the Beis, not always people use oat matzahs, I use oats. Now. You spelt? Oh, so I'm going to give you bad news now, I'm afraid. A couple of problems. When I first started having oat matzahs, I spent a lot of time learning the halachas. Now, there's the Marsham that talks about this. The halacha Bechaber writes, the Shulchan Aruch writes, which one should you use of the 5?
Probably wheat.
Why? No, he says wheat. He doesn't say why.
There's no one eating wheat, then they go, what's right?
Which does?
It
makes no sense.
I bet you think it's the same answers that we have, is not there? Maybe it was
He doesn't say your reason. I'm afraid he doesn't say your reason. There are 2 reasons brought down in the poskim. One is there's a mitzvah to eat matzah l'tei oven, and wheat tastes the nicest. Okay. If that's the reason, if you prefer spelt or I prefer oats, there's no problem. That's it. But there's another reason which the Marsham brings from many poskim, and that is that the halachas of rising dough were set all by wheat. But by the other ones, perhaps they rise much quicker. And according to that, the Marsham says that if we don't know, so therefore we can't use the others because we don't know if it'll be chametz, very frightening. So again, you could say we don't necessarily pass like this Marsham and all end of the day. Okay, that's one problem. Another problem was there was a scientist, a Frum scientist, who lived about 80 years ago, who wrote a book to prove that when the Mishnah gives us this list of names, it's not the same as what we have nowadays. That means that the oats that we have nowadays are not the oats they had in those days, and the spelt not the same, and therefore you can't be oats with anything with wheat. What? Wheat is the only one. He says, for example, I once read the essay book. It's a booklet, not a book, that nowadays is what's called wild barley and barley. He says wild barley, according to him, he holds a Shibboleth Shur. That's what he holds. So they asked him Shimon Zalman about it, and he said, if that's the case, we should maybe even wheat. We can't be 100% sure just because he says so. When we've got Minna Vasilya Biodeda, we've been told that it's oats all the years, it's spelt all the years, and therefore you can rely on it. So therefore, there are a couple of reasons. Aleph, it's not mitzvah namucha, it's not as tasty. Beis u'cheshish v'chametz, and there is a small chashash that it's not the same species that others or cheshish would have sold. Rosh West time told me that when he was the first one to give a hechsher to old matzahs. There was nobody in the world that gave a hechsher to old matzahs before he did. And when he did, he said he got a lot of negative feedback. What's the word for it? Beef. Flack, I was just saying. And what happened was, one of them sent him a photocopy of this essay, the part he talks about it. But again, so he showed me, he got from this Kohelet. I have to say, must admit, that this Kohelet writes about himself that he never eats chickens. Have you ever heard of such a thing? Oh, you'll love hummus here. I eat chickens. You eat chicken?
Why? What's his reason?
Because who says that the chickens of today is the chickens of the old? No, ever. He said that many years ago, there's a chashash, they were crossbred with eagles. Since they were crossbred with eagles, maybe they're not the chickens of the old days. Okay, with eagles. Because that's what he claims. Okay. Then we got the what? Right. Okay. But Yotzin b'Demai, you can be Yotzin with Demai. What is Demai? What is Demai?
I'm not sure whether
Why not sure if two Semais were taken? I have a chashash that covered Beis Medrash. I'm very, very sorry that covered Beis Medrash for first sweets. I remember once in Shul in Gorgeous Green, the ones through in monks, the ones through, and it wasn't in the main minyan. Coming away from monks, but nice. It's not. It's a shul. It's a shul. That's I don't know. You have to. What's the word for it? It's something they buy from an amos. He didn't have two mice were taken. So let's go very, very briefly. How does it go? You plant something. The first thing you have to do. What's the very, very first thing? Bikurim. Bikurim is the very first. After Bikurim comes Truma. Bikurim is how much, by the way? Minater, you can take any amount. Minater, you take you take 60. Then Truma the same. Minater, you can take any amount. Midrabanan, you take a 60th. After Truma, you have Ma'aser Rishon every year. Ma'aser Rishon is how much? 10%. And it goes to the Levi. Most years you have Ma'aser Sheni. What do you do with Ma'aser Sheni? Take it to Yerushalayim, or you redeem it and take the money to Yerushalayim. On the third and the sixth year, you take Ma'aser Oni, which goes to the poor. From Ma'aser Rishon, you have to give Trumas Ma'aser to the Kohen. Truma and Trumas Ma'aser are not allowed to become Tomei, and the Yisroel is not allowed to eat it. Ma'aser Rishon, Ma'aser Oni, anybody's allowed to eat it, and even in a Tomei place, even in Beis HaKvos. Ma'aser Sheni, it can only be eaten in Yerushalayim. They can be eaten by anybody. Those are the brief halachas. So we're going to learn the halachas now, or what can you use for your matzah. So you're allowed to use T'mai, Ma'aser Rishon Shnito Tumos, Ma'aser Rishon if Truma has been taken. Over Ma'aser Sheni v'hekdesh sheniftu, Ma'aser Rishon Sheni and hekdesh that got redeemed. V'akrei ani b'chala b'Truma, akrei is allowed to eat chala and Truma. But Yisroel is not allowed to use chala and Truma. The Lord is going to discuss each case. What is the chiddush? Rashi points out. Let's say Yisroel would eat Truma. Has he done an avera? Terrible avera. For Yisroel to eat Truma is a terrible avera. Chivisa. Has he been yotz the mitzvah of matzah? Oh, so you say because mitzvah baba avera. We surely won't ask about this, including Rashi later. Why the Gemara doesn't talk about this? The Gemara doesn't talk about mitzvah baba avera. The Gemara dashes a pasuk that the Torah says, "Don't eat chametz, eat matzah." From which we learn that when you eat the matzah, the only thing you're concerned about is chametz. If what you're concerned about is also another avera, then you can't eat the matzah. That means if there's another avera involved, you can't be yotz the matzah. So therefore, if Yisroel was to eat truma, it wouldn't be a mitzvah of avera. It wouldn't be a mitzvah altogether, because since it's not something which the Torah says don't eat because it's chametz, but eat the matzah. It's we'll see. Very good. You're not allowed to use teva. That's something we should be taken from. So Ma'aser Rishon we should take to Ma'aser. Ma'aser Sheni v'hekdesh shelo niftu. No Ma'aser v'hekdesh hasn't been redeemed. Chalus ha'todu kikin nozim. A todu is when a person's had one of 4 reasons to thank Hashem. What are 4 reasons? Choila, the word to remember is Chaim. Choila yam yisurim amitbo. Somebody's been not well. Sorry, if a person has been out of prison, not well, across the sea or a desert, then he has to bring a korban todah. Kikin nozi, a person brings a nozi when he's finished his days in the series. He brings special kinds of matzahs. Also matzah, more you think for yourself and you burn not yotzah. Also, Nimke Bashuk, if you made it to sell in the marketplace, Yitzam Ben Yitzam, and the more will explain exactly why. Because the Akshwocha saved him from the danger. So come.
As in,
If you die,
it's being threatened by.
Right. So if he's not well or in prison or cross the
I'm
sea.
talking about someone's been threatened by a terrorist law. Why isn't that?
I hear. Why not? So in as in, I hear. That's a good question. Come on, tell me.
That's what I'm saying. That's why I asked the first question. Was the list in the desert? The list in fall in the category of desert?
I don't know. I hear. Tana, we learn in the Beis. Kusmin spelled min chitin as a kind of wheat. Shul shifo min se'oim a kind of barley. Now, here we have a huge machlok because as Rashi says, we talk about truma. The halacha is you don't take truma from min mish'inu minu. You don't take from one min to another min. So we're talking about truma. Tosfos says no, we're not talking about truma. We're talking about challah. We're talking about challah. That's the Tosfos over here. Let's just see that you can read the Tosfos. Anyone Tosfos page. Kusmin the chitish shul shivim se'oim. Rashi person in the truma min ashim minu. You talk about truma. We oim med mnochas bekishua mucha behedet Beis and the challah misni. We're talking about challah. And Tosfos then continues with two more halachas, and that is like this: that it's not clear cut that spelt is part of wheat, and rye and oats are part of barley, but rather like this: spelt is part of wheat and is part of barley, meaning that if you make a challah and you've got barley and spelt together, it's also good, and so barley and oats. It's only wheat with barley that doesn't work. So there are some of them which go into both categories, and some which only go into one category. And finally, Tosfos says a very important halacha, that when are we talking about challah, is we're talking about we made two separate doughs, one of oats and one of spelt and one of wheat. And then the question is, one thing from one to the other, that's no good. And what happened was, he says, you attached them afterwards, you made the dough, you stuck them together, that's no good, because at the end of the day, each one's min mishin and mino, you have to work out which min it is. But if you make a dough out of different minim together, then everybody agrees you can just take a bit out of it. So if let's say you make a mixture, many times when you read spelt bread, it's many times got a lot of wheat inside it. Even oat bread, many times a lot of wheat. It's a mixture. Then there's no problem. You just take a little bit out of it, and that's good enough. You don't need to. Okay. Says the Gemara. The Gemara explains what they're called. Kusmin is gulba, shifa and dishra, shibul is shul, shivile talo. And again, these are make words for these minim, spelt, rye, and oats. Rashi says, tala is a fox. The oats, the grain of oats, looks like the tail of a fox. And that's why it's called shibolas shul, a grain of a fox, because the grain looks like the tail of a fox. And this is part of that book. If you read it, I've got parts of it, where he talks about the fact that the oats of today don't look like a fox, and therefore he's concerned that it's really the wild barley and such. Okay. Says this, yes, but rice and millet not. Now, if you remember, we learned it in brachas that machlokes Rashi Tosfos what oz and doichen is. Oz, according to Tosfos, is rice, and doichen is millet. Rashi says that oz is millet, and doichen is a different kind of corn. But Amaisa, all the Mefarshim argue with Rashi about we don't bring Rashi in the halacha. But according to Birchim Benuri, he holds that rice and millet, they do rice. And there's a fascinating Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi asks the question that why did they argue about such a thing? Make a dough and see if it rises or not. It's interesting because not always does the Gemara ask such a question. And what the Yerushalmi answers is that it rises a little bit, but it's a question if that rising is called really rising. That means if you cut a rice cake, according to Birchim Benuri, a rice cake could be a kosher matzah. Yes, that's what I'm saying. You don't want it to rise. So it's a baked rice. It could be the thin rice. It could be. Says the Gemara. How do we know it? How do we know only these? Omar b'Shimon ben Lakish v'cheintoned v'Rabbi Shmuel v'cheintoned v'Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Omar kvo lo yisoichal olav chometz shivas yamim toichal olav matzahs. Don't eat chometz. For 7 days you should eat matzahs. Something which comes to chometz can become matzah. They don't become chometz, they only become moldy. That means it doesn't become into a proper rising, it just becomes, it ferments and becomes moldy, but it doesn't actually become into real chometz. So therefore, it comes out we have a hekesh over here. This is not a gzera shov. This is a hekesh. A hekesh is when the pasuk mentions two concepts together. The Torah mentions don't eat chametz, and next to it, the juxtaposition. That's how they say it in English. Is the mitzvah of eating matzah to tell you that what? That whatever could become chametz, you must use for matzah. Something that can't become chametz, you can't use for matzah. And we're going to use this drasha many times. You have to remember the drasha. Something that can become chametz can become matzah otherwise. Bas nisin to look at Yechman Nui Doma Oz Ben Doganu Bechayom Nalchimutzi Kolos. The Tana Yechman Nui Oisa Ba'oz V'Toichem. They should call Rachlitz. He forbids to make rice on Pesach because it might become chametz. That means a cooked rice, according to Yechman Nui, is chametz. Now the words koiv lahachmitz, there are two ways to understand it. Koiv lahachmitz means koiv lahachmitz, kol Hashem chokev. Hashem is quick, meaning that it's close to chametz. It comes chametz even quicker than wheat. That koiv lahachmitz, it is quick and close to become chametz. Alternatively, koiv lahachmitz means it comes close to become a chametz, but it never actually becomes real chametz. What? Right, that's a much later thing. The time of the going, but it's not. We're discussing. So that's not like Vichin. According to Vichin, it's real chametz. So you see that exactly what Vichin holds chametz, but that's. It comes from chametz very quickly. It gets close to chametz, but not real chametz. One is chayav kolos, which means it's proper chametz. But Adam Yitza b'yidei chavasi b'Pesach, a person's Yitza is mitzvah on Pesach. So I looked in the article how to translate kalmis, and they translated kalmis because obviously they didn't know either what it's called. And the Gemara carries on my kalmis, Omar by Sheitzinisa, which again the article translates as Sheitzinisa. They don't know my Sheitzinisa, or Papa Sheitzinisa, the Vishtakcha b'yidei kalnisa. So there they translate kalnisa as poppies. There's a kind of herb that grows amongst the poppies, which what?
Poppy seeds.
No, but it grows amongst the poppies, not poppy seeds itself. So according to Birchim Ben Nuri, there's actually 8 different things that you can use for your matzah. The 5 of our Mishnah, plus Oivers, Deichen, and Shetznisa. That means you can use rice, millet, and Shetznisa for your matzah. According to Birchim Ben Nuri, there are 8 different things you can use for. This halacha, by the way, is not just regarding chametz, and it's not just regarding matzah. There's also a shaila in challah. The Torah says lechem oini referring to matzah. And how do you know that matzah can only come from these 5 things? Because the Torah says don't eat chametz, eat matzah. And when it talks about the mitzvah of afroshas challah, it also says the same halacha that the Torah uses the lashon of lechem. That you have to give a lechem to the kohen. Since the Torah uses the word lechem to give it to the kohen, so therefore we darshan that whatever becomes chametz and whatever you can use for matzah can be used as challah. So, for example, if you make a rice dough, you don't have to give challah. According to Birchim Ben Nuri, if you make a rice dough, you do have to give challah. Omar Rabba Baba Chan Omar Shlokish. Iso shneloisha b'yayin v'shemen v'dvash. If you make a dough out of wine, oil, or honey, ein chayav nalachimus l'koros, not chayav koros. So the Gemara will discuss now why. There's 2 malachim. First, the Hamina and the Maskal. Let's think of the Hamina first. So also, a papa of Hunabed Avishok with Davidi Baovid. So a papa of Hunabed Avishok was sitting at Davidi Baovid. But Yosef Davidi Baovid become a namne. Davidi Baovid was dozing off. Omle Hunabed Avishok a papa. My time at Vishlokish. What's the svar of Vishlokish? That you're not chayav koros for eating a dough which is mixed with wine, honey, and oil. Omale. It's the same drasha we had before to tell us that only something that becomes chametz you can use for matzah. We're using the other drasha now that only something that can be used for matzah can be used for chametz. Something you can use for matzah. You can't use it for matzah. Why not? Shiur. The Torah says lechem oini. We dash lechem oini many times, but one of the basic drashas of lechem oini is what? A poor man's bread. Now, poor people don't add honey or oil or wine to their dough. So therefore, that means the dvash is the other way around from before. Before we said, something which can become chametz, you can be yotze for matzah. Something which can't become chametz, like rice, you can't use for matzah. Now use another round. Something that can be used for matzah, For example, dough which doesn't have honey, but if it has honey which can't be used for matzah because it's not lechem oini, can't be used for chametz. It's can't be no use for chametz. That means, according to this, be'emes, if somebody would ask you, does dough that has wine inside it, does it rise? Does it become chametz? The answer is yes, it does. It really becomes chametz. So why are you not chayav kolos for eating it of a hekesh? Because since you can't use it for matzah, there's no issa to eat it as chametz. But not because it doesn't become chametz. It does become chametz. Only since the Torah says don't eat matzah, don't eat chametz, so we'll fall in that one has to do with the other. So Esav, when the Avishol Apophis, he asked him, what happens if a person dissolves the matzah? V'gomoy, and then he swallows it down. A person's chayav kolos for eating dissolved bread. V'matzahu, in other words, Pesach, you're not yotza your mitzvah on Pesach. If you dissolve the matzah, you're not yotza. Why not yotza if you dissolve the matzah? Oh, who says that? Rashi. Rashi says, I don't know if the bottom Rashi of this page, it's not a normal way of eating it. You don't normally eat something by drinking it. Think of a shash. And the Gemara Chulin asks this question, and the Gemara Chulin gives a different answer. The Torah says lechem oini, and something which has become liquidized is not lechem, it's not bread. And to Pella on Rashi, he doesn't give, he comes up with his own answer. Okay, doesn't give a Torah to the shash on Rashi. So again, you're not yotza. Now, the Maisa we pass, you're allowed to dip your matzah in water, you're just not allowed to dissolve it. And I remember I was going to Shabbos Kodesh years ago, and the person saying that there are some people that they are machmir not to dip the matzah in water because they're worried that it might get dissolved. And it's a silly chumrah because at the end of the day, if it helps you eat it quickly, so then it's a special chiyuv. So therefore, you should encourage people to dip the matzah in water. It's called Yosef Rizum. So Rav and Kirat Sefer. He said it's an interesting halacha. Afterwards, I've discussed with people that you should dip your matzah in water. And since those don't work, okay, but those that do. What? Yeah, because it makes it easier to swallow it down. He said it. So okay. The Gemara, you're not yotze with the matzah, and yet you have the chametz kolos. Let's more cash again. We said that something which is mixed wine, honey, or oil, you're not chayav for chametz. The Gemara asks why not. So the Gemara said because since you can't use it for matzah, you can't use it for since you can't use it for matzah, you're not chayav for chametz. The Gemara is not true because liquidized matzah is no good for matzah, and yet it is chayav for chametz. So we see that the hekesh only goes one way. That means we said before a hekesh. The hekesh is something which can't become chametz, you can't use for matzah. There's something that you can't use for matzah can still be chametz. So the hekesh only goes one way. If the hekesh only goes one way, so back to the first question is, why is there a dough which got honey or oil inside it or wine? Why is it not issa? Issa b'ovid ba'ovin. Ovid ba'ovin woke up and he said, Omar hu dardeki, you little children, hanu tamad vishlokis v'shu w made payrois, because it's fruit juice. Stop with Beis, who made payrois ein machmitzin, and fruit juice does not become chametz. What? So now you've got very long thesis, and here we have regarding fruit juices machlokas after machlokas after machlokas. First machlokas is fruit juice doesn't become chametz. So according to this, you could take flour, add wine, and make yourself a dough, and eat it on Pesach. Oh. So there's machlekas after machlekas. Because of all the different machlekas, we're very machmir, etc. One machlekas is, Shittas Rashi is that it becomes chametz, which is also either midrabanan, becomes chametz noiksha, which is also midrabanan or minatera. But you not have kolos. Kolos is not have. No. He also becomes chametz, but it doesn't become chiyuv kolos. That's Rashi's shitta. Rashi says it's Lamed Vav on the middle of the page. Of course, it becomes chametz, but it becomes chametz noiksha. Becomes what's called a not good, not geschmacker chametz. Teresa over here says, look, let's read the first lines of Teresa. But there is a lav. That's his shittas Rashi. That's he first is quoting Rashi. And then he asks a kasha. And then if you read the 6 lines down, he says, That is not chametz at all. According to Binu Tam, if you take dough, flour, and wine, you're allowed to lechatchila, not even osmid to abanon, to eat it on Pesach. Now, so one machlekes is doesn't become osmid to abanon, or even in hateva. It's machlekes in the shtas Rashi that becomes chametz is osmid to abanon to Raisa. And another, according to Binu Tam, it's not osmid at all. Another machlekes. The Brisa so far said 3. What are the 3? Honey, oil, and wine. But then it carries on because mei peris in machmitzah. Mei peris means fruit juice. What about orange juice? What about apple juice? So some hold that since the Gemara finished off mei peris in machmitzah, therefore all juices are not machmitz. Mash'enkein. Others say no, only these 3. So that's another machlekes. Can you use apple juice with dough with flour? Would you be okay? Rashi himself says that whole halacha mei peris in machmitzah. Sorry. Why? Because then you're adding water. Oh, now come to the next. Mei peris in machmitzah says Rashi. It's only if you use 100% juice. But if you use water, says Rashi, then you have kos. Rashi says you have kos. Rabbeinu Tam mentions it again in this Tosfos. Rabbeinu Tam says that's wrong. Let's see the bottom 6-7 lines of Tosfos. Well, we used to eat matzah baked with eggs, and he said that he ate Erev Pesach in the afternoon of Pesach. He would eat dough made out of matzah shiur, flour baked with eggs, because he held this mutar lechatchila. He held and no. Now, what happens if you add a bit of water? According to Rashi, it's chav kos. Rabbeinu Tam says if there's no water, just eggs and wine, it's not even asa. It's only asa to it's chametz noiksha. Sorry, if there's a bit of water, it's chametz noiksha. If no water, it's not chametz noiksha. It's mutar lechatchila. And there's a shittas of a Rambam, a big chumrah of the Rambam. That the Rambam holds that mei peris with a drop of water becomes chametz so fast that you can't stop it becoming chametz. So the Rambam holds that if you take mei peris and you add a drop of water, then you can't stop it becoming chametz. That means fruit juice with a bit of water is no good. Because of all these different reasons, like Ashkenaz is not to eat matzah shiur on Pesach. The Sfardim do. The Sfardim eat matzah shiur. Again, I just mentioned very, very briefly. This: those who eat oat matzah, spelt matzah, should be aware that oat matzahs and spelts, especially oats, don't grind very well. So many oats, they heat it up. When they heat it up, the steam on the ceiling. The steam on the ceiling, according to some, would be mei peris. Because it's fruit juice. It's juice made out of oats. It's like apple juice, oat juice. You never drink oat juice? Don't drink it every day. Now, you're going to add... Right, you're going to add water when you make the dough. According to the Rambam, would you be able to allow to eat those matzahs? No, you can't. You have this problem. This is a real problem. So the later matzahs nowadays, they dry the ceiling afterwards, but it's not to take. Again, you must remember you've got a few different makoros to be making. Let's work it out. The Rambam says it, but nobody agrees. In fact, Rashi and Tam both don't agree with him. And second of all, it's not that clear that mei peris is referring to oats. We said before it could be referring only to wine, oil, and things. And third of all, there's a very big question if the steam, it eventually turns into drops, is that considered enough oat juice and everything else? Okay, right, so this is, I must admit, mei peris is a whole similar Shulchan Aruch. The time you finish back and forth, it gets quite complicated, mei peris. I remember I did it once years ago, and it's quite complicated to remember all the different machlekes mei peris, and how the Shabbos sometimes says they should be machmir, and so they says they can be make it, etc. Okay. Yotze b'tmai over ma'aser. The Mishnah says you can yotze b'tmai ma'aser. This whole amud now, most of this amud, we have 4 times in Shas, almost word for word. And the funny thing is that we're up to the 4th time already. Can you believe it? And we're not going to come to it again, all the way to come back to brachas. Almost word for word. So you should all know it to be able to fly through it. What are the 4 places in Shas? No. But what are they? What's the Yisod Advar? The Mishnah says you're allowed to be Yotze with Mai, and Ma'aser Vishim, which you take in Tumah, but not Ma'aser Shlam take Tumah. The Gemara is going to ask every time the following questions. Let's go with the style of the Gemara. Either the Gemara is going to ask, it's obvious, because it's produce which is permitted to eat. And if it's produce which is permitted to eat, why shouldn't you be able to? All the world's going to say they shouldn't be allowed to be Yotze because it's produce which is forbidden. So the world's going to always ask either it's obviously okay or it is no good. We have this 4 page shas very briefly. There's a Gemara in Brachas that you could do a zimun on somebody that ate it to mai, or he ate ma'aser vicious to mosoi, or he ate ma'aser sheni, or he ate hektar sheniftu. And again, the Gemara asks every time, if it's hektar sheniftu, what's the chiddush? It's been redeemed. And every time the Gemara exactly the same answers the Gemara gives there, the Gemara gives here. So you've got by eating zimun. We had it in Shabbos. There's a Mishnah Mefanin, where the Mishnah there says that you're allowed to clear out food on Shabbos if you need to be able to eat it. So the more Mishnah there says you're allowed to be Mefanin to mai, and ma'aser vicious to totumoso, ma'aser sheni hektar sheniftu. And in Eruvin, we had it for Eruvei Chet Tchumin, that you're allowed to use the mai for Eruv Tchumin. And again, the Gemara asks the same question, why can you? You're not allowed to eat it. And then the Gemara answers either it's obvious. Each time the Gemara is the same. And now we have it for the 4th time. I'm not going to come back to it. The same thing. So Yotze b'dvar ma'aser chulus. So we're able to fry through. Demai alo chosili. Demai is no good. Why is demai no good? Because you're not allowed to eat demai. And it's more kivin diboy mafkil nichse. Since you can be mafki yonachasim, have on it, you'd be poor. Voichel demai. So ashtanami chosili. Now it's also chosili. Let's just do the top of Rashi for 1 second. Demai alo chosili. V'minu lekamon. Let's see Rashi again. It's important Rashi. Mishi esu v'shubatoi chachometz levadoi. We said before, we mentioned briefly, that if the whole issa is chometz, then you can eat it as matzah. If there's another issa besides, you're not allowed to use it for matzah. It says Rashi inami, alternatively, there are 2 problems with the mai. One is that it's mitzvah b'aveo, going backwards, second reason Rashi. And second of all, we're going to learn that it can only be yotze matzah with something that the whole issa is chometz. Here there's another issa besides for chometz. Answers the Gemara that since if a person was poor, he'd be chotz. Now, we talk about somebody poor or rich in this Mishnah. Rich? Why? How do you know not to have somebody poor?
When we say boy mafke,
Oh, right. Okay. What would the chiddush be? We're talking about a rich person. A rich person allowed to eat man, not allowed to eat man.
No.
So what does it help him? I'm sitting to say tonight, eating my matzah. Am I allowed to eat it or not? Again, let's be very clear. Minat I'm allowed to eat it. Yes. Why? Because roiv amaratz marasin. Minat allowed to. Midra bonon I'm not allowed to. Midra bonon is only midra bonon. So midra bonon, I'm eating this tonight. I'm doing a mitzvah there. Midra bonon, I'm doing another. So why am I allowed to? But the fact is, midra bonon is not allowed to. So you say that the Raisa mitzvah is pushed with the Rabbanon Issa. That's what the Gemara says. I hear. That's what I'm asking you. That's what I just want to hear. So there's a fascinating taste of this. Second taste of this page. He says like this. We just said before, lechem oini. Lechem oini, poor man's bread. My grandfather always used to say the same joke every year. By the time you buy the matzah, you're already poor. You said every Seder night. What? So therefore, since you're a poor man, by the time you can say no, and that's a joke. Lechem oini is a poor man's bread. Meaning the Torah says to you, you should eat it as a poor man would. It says Torah says if that's the case, so you have to imagine you're poor. It's a fast, very strange. Even Chacham says he doesn't understand like what's the logic. The Torah says to you, okay, right, so that's Torah says small. So according to that, going back, then you're mamish fine. That's how Torah says it. The same Rashi is like this, that meaning like this, that the you're not allowed to, but if you ate it, you did nothing wrong. It means the Chachamim never said to you that you're even issa if you ate it. They just said to you, better not. Since if you ate it, it's okay, therefore it's okay. And now the Gemara carries on. The Tanan, Machin Sanim, the Mai, allowed to get the poor people to Mai, the Sachsanya to Mai. What's Achsanya? What's Achsanya? Guess, which guess are we talking about? Armies. In olden days, when you had an army going through your town, you'd have to put the army up. So Rashi says we're talking about Jewish soldiers. And the fact is they're considered poor because they're not at home. Taste says Achsanya Mefarish B'Yushalmi, the third taste of the page, very short one, Nochim, to our goyim. So all ask taste if they're going, what to care, give them to Mai. So ask you to Abbanon. There's a special halacha. No, because we're talking about Demai. Now we're going on to the topic of Demai. There's a special halacha, a person has to be aware, you're not allowed to use tevel. Let's say, for example, like this. I've got 1,000 saw or 1,000 measures of grain. So I know I have to give the Kohen 2%, the Levi 10%. It's a lot of money. So what do? I give it to a goy, and then that way I don't have to give anything because the goy is allowed to eat it. No, you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to give it to a goy to avoid to get to a Maisis. But over here, since it's Demai, you're allowed to give it to a goat. That's a big Chiddush according to this. Going to Rashi, you're allowed to give it to a Yid. Why allowed to give it to a Yid? Because he's poor, because he's out of town. Says, well, Beishamai holds you not allowed to. Not allowed to feed an army Demai. Tesis and Brachas asks the question, what's Rav Huna coming to teach us? Our Mishnah tells us allowed to. He's coming to tell us Shittas Beishamai. We don't care about Beishamai. Beishamai so we don't pass that Beishamai. This is the ancient thing that many times the Amoraim would tell us of a Shitta we don't hold of, in case you once heard a Brisa, which says that you're not allowed to eat the Mai for the poor, and you'd be concerned, where did I get this Brisa from? You'd be worried about it. And then now that I've told you that Shittas Beishamai, you will not be so concerned anymore, because you'll remember, Shittas Beishamai, and that Brisa Beishamai is not a contradiction to what you've heard. So therefore, that's what Rav Huna was gaining. That's what we helped us, that you shouldn't be nervous if you hear such a thing from Beishamai. Okay. Nice edition, you've taken Tuma. Let's go very briefly again. After Bikum, you take Tuma 2%, at the 45th or the 60th, and then you take 10% to the Levi, and the Levi has to give 10% of his 10% to the Kohen, which means 1% if you work it out. Let's have 100 measures. So I give 10 to the Levi. Well, first I give 2 to the Kohen. After Bikum, I give 2 to the Kohen, then 10 to the Levi, 9.8 to the Levi, because I've only got 98 left. And from that 9.8, he gives 10%, which is 1 or almost 1 to the Kohen. So the one Kohen gets 1 from the Levi and 2 from the Yisroel. So if you've taken what's the problem? You've taken Maisa, you've taken Truma, you've taken Tumas Maisa, you should be thrilled. Not the Levi came to me before I had the chance to give my 2 to the Kohen. And he said to me, I'll do you a favor. What I'll do is, I'll take from you now, then that way you'll have 90 left. When you give to the Kohen, you only need to give him 2. You don't have to give him actually 1.9 that comes out. You have to give him less than 2 because you've got less. And then you will have saved a little bit. So he came and he took Maisa before Truma. Now he took his Tumas Maisa. He took 10% of his 10%. He took a 10th of the 10th. But he never was mashlim to the Kohen, the Truma that we cheated him out of. So you might have thought that it's no good. Kumash Malon, since the Levi came very early, and he came b'shibonin when it was still grain, which is before the time that Truma is chal. Who remembers when is Truma chal? When is the chil of Truma chal? When you made it a pile. That's the Gabi. That's the thing. When you made it into a pile. So therefore, since you made it into a pile, it came before you made it into a pile. So the Levi managed to do a shvindel, a shtick, and Taka the Kohen will never get it. Says the Gemara. He took to us mice, not to a Gedolah. And we learn from it. Only into mice. You don't need to do both. You only have to take one and not the other. So a Levi only has to give Trumas Maisa. He doesn't have to give Truma plus Trumas Maisa. We know that if the Levi came later, that means after I made it into a pile, then the Levi came, and again he tried to do this shvindel, this trick, and he took 10% in order to. The halacha is what? That after the Levi gets his Maisa, he has to take Truma Gedola and Trumas Maisa. Right? Remember the halacha is very clearly. If after it's already a pile, the Levi gets his Maisa, he has to take Truma and Trumas Maisa. Why? We just said that Drasha Maisa and Maisa Martircha, not 2. You only have to give 1. The Kol Matnisechem, all your gifts, so he does. So again, so if somebody would say to you like this, a Levi came and took Maisa without taking Truma first, does he have to give Truma or not? He has to always give Trumas Maisa. Levi always has to give Trumas Maisa. Does a Levi have to give Truma or not? What's the answer? Again, no, the Levi came and took it before I had the chance to take Truma. A Levi came before I had the chance to take Truma. Does a Levi have to give, he has to give Trumas Maisa. Does he have to give Truma to replace the Truma which I didn't take? Oh, depends when he came. That's the answer. What he said it 4 times so far. 4 times was learned. Again, if the Levi, again, let's go through it very slowly. If a Levi comes and takes a Maisa before I gave Truma to the Kohen, there's lots of Kohenim here, so emotions are running high. They're losing 0.2% on my produce. And you must remember, now I've got 100 million acres of ground. And there's a famous story of Chaim Kreisler. They once came to the Steinberg. He said to Matan Torah that somebody did a shidduch of a diamond. He sold one to the other. It's caught in the hack. It's beautiful. So they got it to. What happened was, they had an argument that the one who was the broker wasn't sure whether he was going to get a 0.3% or 0.5% of the deal. And the Steinberg said, for you to come to such Nashkeit, and he said, yeah, the deal was about 10 million euros, I don't know, million pounds. And he said, the third or fifth makes a huge difference. Again, a Levi came to me, I'm Yisroel. A Levi came and took Maisa before. Anybody here Levi, by the way? Yeah. You're a Levi. Oh, so you come, you want to save me, and you want to save me money. So you came and you took Maisa before I took Truma. So now he gets more than everybody, but the Levi gets much more because Levi gets 10%. I mean, you only have to give a tiny bit of Truma. So the Levi took 10% before I took Truma.
He has to give from him anyway.
No, that's the question I'm asking. Trumas Maisa, he has to give 10% of the 10% he has to give. That's 1% of the whole total he has to give. Does he have to give Truma or not? What's the answer?
No, because you're going to have to give Truma.
No, it depends when he came. It depends. No, Truma on the rest, you're right. Again, I have 100. He took 10. I only have to give Truma on the 90. I don't have to give Truma on the 10. He took it. He took it. No, it's not. It's his. No, I don't have to. Goes to him. So does he have to give Truma Smaisa? Does he also have to take Truma Gedola? Yes or no? What's the answer? Yes, depends when he came.
Yes, he has to.
No, he doesn't. If he came before I made it into a pile, meaning before the Chiyuv of Truma was Chal, so he has to take Truma Smaisa, but not Truma Gedola, the Kohen will actually lose out of it. The Kohen will actually lose. Work it out. I had 100. I should have given 2 to the Kohen, 9.8 to him, and he would have given 0.98 to the Kohen. The Kohen would have got 2 plus 0.98, 2.98. This way, he took 10 before I took Truma Gedola. So therefore, I give of the 90 Truma Gedola, which is only 1.9. Am I right? What's you should know? What's a 50th of 90? 1.8. It's 1.8. Plus, he'll give only Truma. He won't give any Truma at all. So he'll give 1 to the Kohen. So he'll only give the Kohen 1. So that's 2.8. While the other way around, you'd have given 2.98. The Kohen lost 0.18 of the produce, if you work it out. But if the Levi comes after it was already a pile, then what happens? Then he has to give the Truma. And we've got 2 droshes. One it says, Maisa na Maisa, that you only ask if Trumas Maisa, not Truma. We have another drosha, we call Matnei Seichem. So we've got 2 droshes. Says the Gemara, what made you see? Rashi explains, what made you say that one drosha is coming to tell you that you're chayav after you got to the pile, and the other drosha is to tell you you're potter before you came to the pile? Maybe it's the other way around. No. What do you mean? Why? I don't understand. So what? That's not a problem. No, Maisa, no. Because that's not a problem. It says, well, hi Idgen, this is where it became dogon, meaning a pile became dogon, it didn't become dogon. There's a very, very beautiful twist of Rosh I'd like to try to explain. If you have it, it's good. If not, it's not the end of the world. Tosis in Brochos asks a very big question of Rashi. So much so he disagrees with Rashi completely. That the Gemara says Umaro Iso. That means you've got 2 droshes. One to say that Levi has to give Truma, besides for Trumas Maisa. Let's say Levi always has to give Trumas Maisa. One drosha he has to also give Truma. One drosha he doesn't have to. And the Gemara asks the Kasha, Umaro Iso. What made you say that's going by A and that one's going by B? Maybe it's the other way around. Faith says, what logic would it be that when he came later, when it's ready much later, when I'm ready chayav to give the Kohen, then he's potter. And he came earlier, what would the logic be? You don't need a svara. It's the most obvious thing that if you've got one person to say that the Levi does have to give, one person that the Levi doesn't have to give, that obviously the logical thing should be that when he came later, he has to, he came earlier, he doesn't have to. So this is such a beautiful chap. When the Levi came earlier, the Levi was being naughty because the Levi knows that at this stage, I haven't given Truma. So therefore, he's trying to avoid Truma, so therefore maybe then he should be chayav. When he came later, the Levi can become and say, oh, wait a second. I thought you already gave Truma. I wasn't trying to avoid you giving Truma. I thought I came later, so therefore maybe on such a case he could say I was a shogeg. It's a nice chapter to end for Rashi. Says to Mavu Isa is a whole new explanation in the Gemara. What's mean Mavu Isa? Okay. Let's go weiter. They've been redeemed. Of course, if they've been redeemed, what's the chiddush? She only gave the principle, not the fifth. The Kamash Malon, the Chumash Ma'akev, we had exactly the same Gemara there in Bochas and Shabbos and Erevin, that if a person redeems Ma'aser Sheni v'Hekdesh, let's say it was worth £100, he redeems £100, and he hasn't yet paid the 25, it's good enough, and you can eat it for matzahs. Can you allowed to use challah to pshita? Why shouldn't they use challah and tumah? You might have thought there has to be matzah which anybody can eat, and this matzah can't be eaten by everybody. Why can't it be eaten by everybody? Because he's suddenly you can't eat it. Matzahs, the Torah says matzahs many times to include. You can't use tevel. Pshita, obviously you can't use tevel. Why can't you use tevel? Because Ga'issa. It's only tevel midurabbanon. It's a plant which is not perforated, a plant pot which has got no holes. So in that Torah, there's no chiyuv to usamais only midurabbanon. So that's against what you were saying before, because if we hear the Mishnah is telling you that if you eat a matzah, which is midurabbanon, you need to take tumas hamaisus, and you never took tumas hamaisus, or you yotze the mitzvah matzah, no, the Mishnah says you're not. Again. The Gemara said we're talking about you ate tevel. Of course, if you ate tevel, it's no good. Tevel is also that too. Answers more to why it's also midurabbanon. But wait a second, I don't understand you. If it's also midurabbanon, why can't I be yotze my matzah? Because now it's all right. Now is no din tevel. Is a raya that the issa d'rabbanon spoils it from this own matzah. That means if somebody would say to us, therefore that comes back the kasha on Demai, that why was Demai okay? So therefore you have to say that it's not also midurabbanon. It's only nechatchila. You shouldn't be able. It's okay. If something's also midurabbanon, not yet. And here the B'chanan and others all ask the kasha, even the one ask kasha. What about mitzvah? Why can't you say I say dechelusa say over here? Why don't we say that I say of eating matzah? Push away the lusa say of the d'rabbanon, etc. And ask other questions. And they say it's not be'idne, it's not the same time. I want to get a bit further. Okay. It says more right. You haven't taken too much shit. If you haven't taken too much, it's no good. The Levi came when he was ready a pile, and he never gave truma. He only gave trumas ma'aser. Like a papa said to Abai that what? That since the Torah says you don't need to take truma when he took it for shibolim huad, and you don't need to take truma when he got to the pile. No. So the Mishnah when it says that we're no good, we're talking about when Levi came when he was ready a pile, and you gave him ma'aser without giving the kohen truma, and then the Levi gave trumas ma'aser without doing truma gedolah. So the halacha is that you can't be yotze with such matzah because it's also to eat it. If you haven't redeemed the pshita, if you haven't redeemed the force, it's no good. The word redeemed. And the word redeemed correctly. A simon is a coin, which is exactly the shape of a 50 pack, exactly right. But it's not got the stamp on it. So you might have thought there's nothing wrong. And it's very interesting because you're allowed to redeem on apples and oranges and gold and anything. But a coin, it has to be a real coin. That's a very interesting halacha. If you were to use it, what?
It's a gold coin.
We should have asked the kasha. What happens if it's a piece of gold? It's not a coin. It's very complicated. Let's get to the details. I don't know the answer. But they point out that you can redeem it on other things. But if you're going to redeem it on money, it has to be real money and not an asima. The hekdesh again. It has to have a su of a king. The hekdesh shechilu lo yagabe karka. Hekdesh we talk about redeemed it on property. That you have to use money which you can move. So if you take, the Mishnah says to ma'aser sheni and hekdesh lo niftu. What we're talking about lo niftu, it means that it was redeemed, but redeemed incorrectly. How can you redeem something incorrectly? Ma'aser sheni, you use a coin which doesn't have a stamp. And hekdesh, you use property, and property is not good to redeem hekdesh. Now we're going to have the real brisa which talks about the halacha. You might have thought you can use for matzah produce which has not been taken to matzah. The Gemara, before the brisa even has a chance to conclude its words, the Gemara interrupts. The word tevel, by definition, means what? Something you haven't taken to matzah. Shaloi niskan means that you haven't fixed it. So it's a repetition in the terminology. Tevel shaloi niskan. Every tevel is not niskan. If it's niskan, it's not tevel. So but tevel shaloi niskan called socho. It means tevel which hasn't been properly fixed. For example, you took tumah gedolah, you took tumas ma'aser, you never took tumas ma'aser, or ma'aser vishlam ma'aser sheni. Afilu ma'aser oni, or you took everything, you didn't take ma'aser oni. What's the chiddush that you didn't take? You took everything except for ma'aser oni. What's the chiddush in that? Rashi points out, unfortunately, the Baruch Halava says in more detail that every single one of them has some level of kedusha, except for Ma'aseh, worked out. Tvuma, Bikurim, of course, goes to English. Tvuma, only a kohen and only betal. Ma'aseh Rishon, you have to take from it Tumas Ma'aseh, and the Tumas Ma'aseh part of it, it's got tremendous kedusha. It can only be back and only betal. Ma'aseh Sheni can only be eaten in Yerushalayim. The only thing that has no kedusha whatsoever in any form, in any sense, is Ma'aseh Ani. The Ani can flush it down the toilet. He can eat it in the Beis Kvoros. He can eat it with his tummy. Everybody can throw it. He can eat it. There's no kedusha ever to Ma'aseh Ani. So you might have thought, if I've taken everything, and the only thing I haven't done is Ma'aseh Ani, well, I've done my job already. Come on, leave me. No, Afa PK, you're not yotzi your mitzvah matzah. So how do we know the Ma'aseh? You know, it's a Talmud Loima, the Yisroel of Chometz. Mish Isur Mishubal Toichel of Chometz. I've already said this to us a few times. The Torah says, don't eat Chometz, eat matzah. Mashma, the whole problem is something which the Torah says, don't eat Chometz, eat matzah. Yotza zeh, to exclude, let me just finish this off, sorry. Yotza zeh, what did you say? Sorry, I should interrupt you. We do. We say it mufresh, and then afterwards we point to it. No, we don't need to point to it, because since it's a mitzvah chavel of araya, so we say to him that you can have it if you can prove it. Yotzas, no, there's a reason why not by Oni, right? So a second, there's a small because it's got no kedusha, so therefore you've got no, you can eat it. We're mafish it, and then we eat it ourselves. We're mafish Ma'aseh Ani, and then we eat it ourselves because it's got no kedusha. Oh, the Torah says, don't eat chametz, eat matzah, which the drasha is something which you're not allowed to eat chametz, eat matzah. But the issa is not don't eat chametz. Here, what is the issa? Don't eat tevel. Says the Gemara. What do you mean don't eat tevel? There's still a issa of chametz. The drasha is that now this is not something which the Torah says don't eat chametz, eat matzah. But there's still a issa of tevel. So there's still a issa of chametz. The Tanya. This is a very important. I want to go through it a little bit. Firstly, it's the Veda in Yom Kippur. According to Reb Shimon, he's not chayav kos, right? That means if you eat the Vela, you only get malchus. Eating Yom Kippur, it's much worse than malchus. It's chayav kos. But Reb Shimon says like this: it was in the Vela before Yom Kippur came in. So Yom Kippur came in, Einis Chalalissa. Now, Lemaisa, we also agree in principle Einis Chalalissa. But why, if a person eats the Veda Yom Kippur, does he get kos? Does anybody know? Oh, because Issa Kolol or Issa Chomo is more Chomo. So Yom Kippur, you've got Issa Kolol, because not allowed to eat, not just the Veda, not allowed to eat anything. But Shimon takes it to the most extreme, and he holds Einis Chalalissa. So if something's a bit Asa, then it's also completely, and then you can never add another Issa. So according to Reb Shimon, if I've got something which I haven't taken too much of Ma'ases from, and then it becomes Chometz on Pesach, and I eat the Chometz on Pesach, have I been over Issa Chometz on Pesach? Or should we not? I'm not with over Issa Chometz, because there is no Issa Chometz, and Issa Chalalissa. So therefore, the Beis is going according to Reb Shimon, the Beis says like this. The Torah says, don't eat Chometz, eat matzah. But this is something where there's no Issa to eat Chometz, because it's already Teva.
Why is the difference on Yom Kippur?
Exactly the same.
No, because it's a meeting Yom Kippur. So why couldn't the Shimon is that why
that's what Shimon says. No, he says it's not chal. Therefore, it's not chal.
Why is that not chal?
No, it says not Issa. The Issa Chometz is not chal. Since the Issa Chometz is not chal, so therefore the only Issa you've got left is the Issa of Teva, and therefore the Torah says don't eat Chometz, eat matzah. This is not something Chometz. That's right. Which is why I understood the Gemara originally. The Torah says don't eat chametz, eat matzah. This is something which don't eat chametz and tevel. So you got two. So pray the Gemara midi bevad ksiv. Does the Torah say alone? We'll stop here. I want to summarize what we just said. Again, the Torah says don't eat chametz, eat matzah. From there we learn that anything which is forbidden because of chametz, you can use it for matzah. But something which is forbidden for other reasons, you can't be yotze matzah. So tevel, etc., or anything like that. For the Gemara, wait till you still got the issa of chametz. The Gemara's got two answers. One answer is we're going to of Shimon and issa chalalissa, and be'emes you don't have the issa of chametz, or we're going to go to the chachamim that what? That is be'emes there is the issa of chametz, but the Beis means you've got two issa, and we want to look for something which only has one issa. The Gemara pushes away that answer. The Gemara says that's not the lashon of the Beis. The Beis it doesn't say the word bad alone. So therefore, we're going back to the first pshat. We're going to Shittas of Shimon. Lemaisa, we pass even without Shimon that a person who eats chametz on Pesach, is person who eats matzah on Pesach from something which is anyway forbidden. He's not been mekayem the mitzvah of matzah. So you have to make sure that the matzah they're eating has got no other yisur. Okay. Good. Good.